Hello, I'm going to talk about guidelines for discussing issues. I think this video will be about 15 to 20 minutes long. You can always pause. The first thing you want to do when you're talking about issues of race and racism is to set some ground rules. Let me just say that's at any level. And so I'm going to sort of just say one thing first. There are two kinds of teaching pedagogies or teaching styles. One is called assimilationist, and one is called culturally responsive, or you may have heard culturally relevant or culturally sustaining. Assimilationist teaching is sort of the conventional teaching you see. The whole idea is that the teacher is going to teach without any regard to the student's particular cultural characteristics. And so the goal sort of is to get the student to fit into society. In contrast, in this course, we're going to be focusing on the antithesis of that. And we're going to be focusing on culturally relevant pedagogy, where teachers are going to try to make connections between their students, the national, local, cultural, and global identities. So the first one is more conventional. This is a little bit different. I hope you can see that there's enough evidence that conventional hasn't been that effective. And so the way to think about this is, how do you teach the student, not just the content? We're going to get a lot more into that. Okay, so these guidelines, it's okay to do this with students. Make adaptations. Here I'm elaborating more, but just have some general guidelines. These are some general things I say when we're talking about issues. First of all, in this course and any other conversations you're having, set your own boundaries. You know what you feel like sharing and what makes sense to you. Share that, and you don't have to share any more or less. You will be speaking from your own experience, so don't generalize about other people. So if I were to say black people do, unless I am citing a body of literature or my experience is saying my experience is, then I should just say this is what I have experienced. Listen respectfully to different perspectives. There may be times somebody may post something, you may disagree, or say something. You may hear or read something that differs from what you believe, but try to at least listen. And the big thing here, focus on what you can learn, not what you think may not work. Okay? What can you learn from this? Now, talking about issues of race and racism and oppression and colonization and other topics we're going to raise may cause some discomfort. So in these conversations, one other thing I always tell teachers is to kind of be aware, and so educators, I should say, tell the students that discomfort is actually part of the process. In fact, you all learned about Jean Piaget and his whole concept of disequilibrium. And disequilibrium is when you have, you're striving for cognitive harmony. You're trying to learn something, but you're struggling. Equilibrium is the point at which learning occurs, when you have cognitive harmony. You're like, I've learned this new thing. But in that process, there are times you don't know and you're uncertain. That is actually the only point during which learning can occur. If you stay in your comfort zone, you're never going to learn anything else, because you're not riding that learning curve and you're not getting through that disequilibrium. So understand that a lot of times in schools, African American and other culturally and linguistically diverse students are in a state of discomfort very often. So on behalf of the children, you try to remain open and try to ride that discomfort. I think it always helps just to recognize that, okay, I'm feeling some sort of way, and this is what that means. So that leads me to talk a little bit more about comfort zones. We all have different levels depending on your experiences, what you read, what you think. You may feel more comfortable with some issues than other people. you may feel more uncomfortable with some issues. But either way, just recognize what your comfort zone is and try not to withdraw or resist any new information. Now, that doesn't mean you won't read against topics, and I'll talk about oppositional reading where you raise questions, but it does mean you're going to be open. So one thing I'm going to try to show you is how you can recognize when you are on that learning edge, when you feel uncomfortable. So I'd like for you to take 2 minutes to think about a time when you remember being on a learning edge, where you're outside your comfort zone. It can be academic, it can be personal. I'm going to share my 2 examples, and then I want you to pause and write down or think about some examples of your own. So I didn't learn how to ride a bicycle until I was 14 years old. And my sister teased me so much that I decided that I was going to do it at night. I went in the backyard when everybody was sleeping. I failed. I was afraid, had a lot of anxiety, and that's sort of out of my comfort zone. It was totally out of my comfort zone because I only liked doing things I knew how to do. But I stuck with it, and then of course I am now able to ride a bicycle. I don't like doing it, but I can. My other example is an academic one. My PhD is in educational research and statistics, and I did well with statistics, but advanced measurement was a little bit difficult for me. And I had a Vietnamese American professor, Dr. Nguyen Nguyen. It's not spelled the way it looked, but I would always say to myself, Nguyen, why? I physically got sick before going to class every week. But I struggled, and I recognized my discomfort and actually ended up passing the class. Now, I won't tell you I got an A. I did get a B, probably one of my only Bs, but I rode that learning curve. So you pause for a minute and think about what internal cues will let you know. How will you know when you're feeling uncomfortable and you're not just disagreeing? Okay, so when you find yourself withdrawing or resistant to information, that's a learning edge. Now, these are some ways you might know. You might feel annoyed. Like, I'm so tired of people talking about this. Or angry. Why are they always talking about this? Or anxious. I'm very uncomfortable. You may be surprised that you have strong feelings about something. Or confused, like I don't quite understand it. Or even defensive. Or other emotions. All of these are signs that your comfort zone is being challenged. If you retreat at this time, you're not going to be able to learn the content of this course. And you're losing an opportunity to understand and also to be able to effectively teach African American and other culturally and linguistically diverse students. Sometimes you'll need to seek support, and I'll be very supported throughout the class, but also from me, from coworkers, colleagues, other classmates. This is just something from Teaching Tolerance for you to think about. And just reflect on this. Which one of these do you agree with for yourself? I would rather not talk about race or racism. I'm very uncomfortable talking about race or racism. I'm usually uncomfortable talking about race or racism. I'm sometimes uncomfortable talking about race or racism. Or I'm usually comfortable talking about race or racism. This is important for you to know where you are. Again, as you're sort of gauging what you think. Or I'm very comfortable. Now, if you feel like you're not comfortable, then commit to learning more by studying history and following up and brushing up on events. In this class, you'll get to learn lots of things as long as you remain open. And practice helps. You get better at anything by doing it. If you have been in classrooms where people bring up issues of race or mention the word black or white, or you feel like you have to whisper the word, or you reroute classroom conversations, commit to writing out the discussion the next time. Sometimes it's as much as just listening and say, well, let's talk about this more later. Another example of discomfort, if you feel isolated when you're teaching, then try to find a colleague who you can talk to. By the way, doing this work, it's very important that you collaborate with others. And you'll learn more about this when you read Chapter 2 of my textbook. Do you worry about your ability to answer questions? Sometimes people don't venture into areas that they're uncomfortable because they really think that maybe I can't answer. That's okay. Just recognize we don't have all the answers. None of us do. And just be willing to learn with your students. Let them know, I don't know, but we can find out together. Okay, another thing, so we talked about comfort zones, learning edges. There's one other thing I want to talk about, that's triggers. Sometimes there are certain words or actions that will stimulate an emotional response. And usually this is because it taps into something that's very, very emotionally repressed, or something that maybe you haven't really dealt with. But usually it's instantaneous, so you need to know what those words. These are examples from the literature. People saying, I don't see differences. People are just people to me. That could be a trigger because we are different, and unless you are unable to see, if you're blind, otherwise or visually impaired some way, then you can see the differences. What do you people really want anyway? You people tends to be pejorative. It makes the person who you're referring to as other, as if there's something wrong with them. Here's a sexist example. I think that men are just biologically more adapted to leadership roles than women. That might be a trigger for people who are alert to sexism. I feel so sorry for people with disabilities. It's such a tragedy. If everyone just worked hard, he or she can achieve. Again, this whole idea of this work ethic and meritocracy, that all you have to do is work hard. It doesn't acknowledge systemic differences that we're going to talk about in this class. Homeless people prefer their lives. Okay, this whole idea of it kind of excuses people from doing anything by saying, well, this is what they want to be. They just want to be homeless. Or things like, I think people of color are blowing things way out of proportion. So one of the things you're going to learn, and as you read in this class, if somebody says it's an issue for them, it's an issue for them. It may not be an issue for you, but it is for them. So we have to understand that. So these are some, like for me as a black person, when people say black people do or don't, black people don't know how to handle their money. It's a trigger, so I'll tell you what you do when you have a trigger. Black parents don't care about their children, or they should be more involved. I can guarantee you that my children's teacher said, I wish she would be less involved. It's a stereotype. So it's a trigger for me. Or, I'm African American and my children did well in school. This is a trigger for me because it tells me that the person has probably assimilated to the point where they don't recognize the structural inequities that exist, and the reality that if you look at any of the statistics, that African American students are not faring well. So even for our own children, my own children did well, but this is bigger than our own children. Or teachers have to teach all children. This is a trigger for me because as soon as you start talking about black children, people will say, well, why are we focusing on black children? We have to teach all children. And it's a trigger for me because we're not teaching all children well. When we ask, and how are the children? Many times, African American children are not faring well, as I will help uncover in this course. And then we'll talk about what to do. You can pause right now and think about examples of your own. Things that may trigger you. Maybe I've said something that triggered you. And then so we'll go from there. Now, if you're triggered, try to listen and learn. You can tell people why it was a trigger for you. Like, students are really good at doing this. This is a trigger for me. And the person doesn't have to respond. It's okay to say, I'm sorry. You don't have to say, this is what I meant. But through discussing, you can figure out, things that may trigger other people, and understand that you may trigger people as well. And don't worry about making mistakes and saying, like, I don't know whether to say African American or black or what. We're going to make mistakes because one of the things about issues of race and racism is, we're learning more and more. So even what is considered okay at one point changes very quickly. You'll hear lots of examples of that. Like, I don't use the term slave. And I used to use enslaved person to focus on the process that was something done, but now I use people who are enslaved, so I put the person first. But if somebody talks to me and they say the word, well, I'm teaching about slaves, that's a trigger. It alerts me, but I also can process it and understand that that's a terminology that's still out there. I don't use the word minority. I feel like it's often a double entendre, meaning less than as well. Anyway, those are some triggers for me. So, in general, try to see issues beyond your own experiences. Try to think about how they look to culturally and linguistically diverse students. Understand that as educators, we can't do everything, but we can change what is done in our classrooms or educational spaces, schools, universities, wherever we are. But if we continue to do the same thing that has been shown to be unsuccessful, as I will demonstrate, we're going to get the same results. The other thing is, we cannot change children's families. We can influence them. So I'm going to recommend that you figure out ways of focusing on what you can do in your educational space, and also try to get support from parents. Lastly, I want you to know there are many examples of successful teachers teaching the same population of students, and I'm going to show you examples of those. And one final comment, I just want you to know that this information, when you're teaching about African American students, it's important to white students and teachers as well, not just black teachers and black students. Part of it is there are lots of misconceptions. People think that when you talk about cultural diversity, it only refers to people of color, and that white children are not taught that they actually have racial identities as well. And it doesn't support them in terms of what do they do, how can they help fight against racism, how can they help fight against white superiority, how can they learn not to contribute to power inequities. So all the conversations we're having are useful for most people. So even if you're teaching a class where all the kids are white or only one or two African Americans, we have to also have these conversations. And the important thing is so they can distinguish between being a non-racist and anti-racist. So I'm going to end with this video. If it doesn't play well, I tested it out earlier. There was a little bit of echo. You'll have the link. It's only about 2 minutes long. And I'm going to end with this video. Are you anti or non-racist?
So I have a question for you. Are you non or are you anti? Several months ago, in response to Ferguson, Baltimore, the killings of Freddie Gray and Tamir Rice, my friend Caitlin put up a Facebook post breaking down the difference between non-racism and anti-racism. Most of us are non-racist. Because racism is looked upon as some moral lapse, we feel quite self-assured by simply not being racist. I'm not a bigot. I don't sing that N-worm when my favorite rap jam comes on. I didn't vote for that guy. I'm not burning any crosses. I'm not a skinhead. I don't, I won't, I'm not, I've never, I can't. What you end up with is an entire moral stance, an entire code for living your life and dealing with all the injustice in the world by not doing a damn thing. That's the great thing about none. You can pull it off by simply rolling over in your bed and going to sleep. So why are you sitting at home and watching things unfold on TV instead of doing something about it? Because you're a non-racist, not an anti-racist. Now do this for me. Take the C out of racist and replace it with a P. I'm not a rapist. I'm not friends with any rapist. I didn't buy that rapist last album. All these things that you're not doing. Meanwhile, people are still getting raped and black boys are being killed. It's not enough that you don't do these things. You're going to bed with a clear conscience is not going to stop college students from getting assaulted. You thinking climate change is terrible is not going to stop climate change. You being so assured that you're not anti-black, anti-Muslim won't stop the next hate crime. And it's wonderful that you recognize how brave gay people are when facing persecution, but they aren't the ones who need to be brave. We need to get active. We need to hold people accountable. We need to accept that what hurts one of us hurts all of us. And we need to stop thinking that injustice going on in the world isn't to an extent our fault. We need to stop being non and start being anti.
Racism is a business. For centuries, it has underpinned